Hello, everyone. I'm going to do a quick walkthrough on the major categories that we feel is important for both tenants and investors to understand. So if we're looking at this sheet, what we have here is a few columns. It's a tier, so category A, B, C, D, a category, rent, the tenant buyer down payment or option fee, the equity margin, and then we kind of have a range of a low, average, and high. So in general, what does that mean? What we've found out is that for both tenants and investors, what they care about the most is the home. First and foremost, the home, does it meet their buying criteria? Is it the right location, bed, bath, all of that. But then from a numbers perspective, it's the rent, it's the tenant buyer down payment, or call it sometimes referred to as an option fee. It's the equity margin. So let me take these one at a time. Rent. So on a $200,000 house, a low rent might be $1,200 a month. An average rent might be $1,600 a month, and high rent might be $2,500 a month. So you could see how, based on some of these other categories, what the range would be. And so for tenants, you obviously want the lowest rent. For investors, you want the highest rent. As far as what the tenant buyer is putting down for an option fee, the minimum is usually 2%, average might be 10%, and the high might be 20% from like maybe a commitment to buy the home. An equity margin ratio. So what we've defined that in is the initial difference between the cost that you buy the home and the current market value. So if you had a $200,000 home, a low equity margin would be you basically bought the home for 200 and paid closing costs. So you're into it a little bit more than it's worth. A good equity margin is if you somehow got that $200,000 home for 180,000. So if the investor gets it for under 200,000 and it's actually worth 200,000, that's a great risk reduction to the investor. What we found out next is the location. If it's a high crime area, investors and both tenants aren't, super interested versus a brand new high up and coming area. The home condition can vary from needs a lot of work to brand new. And then the tenant buyer grade or the tenant is typically kind of on a range. So like a D might be you just got out of a bankruptcy, you got evicted, you have a 400 credit score. An average might be, a 670 credit score. You don't have any judgments. You have pretty good rental history. And a high is, maybe you got a 780 credit score and you have a significant down payment. So that's what we see as tiers A and tier B. But there's still a lot of other factors. So we'll briefly go through these. Rent credit. So what percent of the monthly payment goes towards the tenant as their equity? Anywhere from 0 to maybe 15%. The moving timeline. Some investors can close in less than 30 days. Most are between 30 and 60. Some probably take more than 60. The buyback premium increase. So this is if the investor buys it for 200,000, what percent increase per year are you buying the home back? So let's say it was year one, you got the option to buy back the home for 210,000 or 216,000 or maybe 220,000. So obviously the lower this percentage is, the better for the tenant. The higher it is, the better it is for the investor. And depending on what the home does, appreciations can range anywhere from negative to, positive 20%, but this is kind of the range that we found. When we initially purchase the home, when the investor initially buys the home, who pays for the closing costs? So this is, title work, initial closing fees. So it's either the investor, the maybe it's shared between the investor and the tenant, or maybe you have a seller concession where the actual seller of the home, is able to purchase the homes. Because remember, you're buying homes listed for sale, not existing inventory. Who's responsible for repairs? Anywhere from the investors taking on everything to the tenants taking on everything to, some shared where we've seen it's 50-50 or the tenant takes the first $500 and then it's split 50-50 after that. So there's kind of a variety of categories here. How long is the lease and the option? Anywhere from 1 to 5 years. A home purchase price, probably anywhere from 100 to 750,000. Is the option fee or the tenant buyer down payment refundable? 100%, 50%, or just no? Um, Pets, can you do that? Is there smoking? Who pays for the inspection? And that can be split. So when looking through and negotiating, this is what we found as the top primary criteria for investors and tenants for negotiating, which is the rent to price ratio. Just take the rent times 12 months and divide it by the purchase price. You kind of get a range here. For the option fee, it's, if it's a $200,000 house, it's anywhere from 4 grand down to 40 grand down. And then are they buying the home at market or below for where they're going? You kind of move on to the second tier. So this is just a really short video going through, you know, what both sides are actually interested in and how each of these can kind of be on a spectrum where one, investor or one connection might have, a variety of, these factors. So you can kind of go around and, check what the different boxes are. And then lastly, there's some investor specific categories. So what does an investor, what we found, so these are kind of shared categories. What we found specific to real estate investors who are purchasing the home that have the capital is they care most about what's their almost their initial equity into the home. Either they're okay paying market value. They don't like necessarily paying above market value, so that's not great. But if they can get it at a discount, they prefer that. And then the second is what is their total return? If they were just putting their money in savings or putting it in the stock market versus something else, why would they choose to put their money into a single family rental property with a lease to buy candidate in it? That's because they think it's a better risk to reward than something else. So an overall annualized return is one. Then we found the actual cash flow, which is cash on cash. And then the second one is the risk of capital or risk of loss of capital. Basically, investors don't want to lose money. And so that's kind of their first rule is they don't want to lose money. And so by having an equity margin, having some sort of projected return based on the risk, some investors are willing to take a higher risk with a higher reward. And then lastly, a total profit and how much cash is needed to facilitate the transaction. So this is kind of a sneak peek behind what we found as the most important categories in a lease purchase option, lease to buy, rent to own type of a transaction. Hopefully this is helpful.